Okay, well, welcome to the Milwaukee County Historical Society. Thank you all for being here. My name is Ben Barbera. I'm the Interim Executive Director, and I'm very excited to introduce or welcome you to this panel today. I think it's going to be very interesting. I did extensive research on Bronzeville for my master's thesis, so I'm really excited to see what people have to say. So, as the least interesting person here, I'm going to get out of the way and let Katanga take over. But again, just thank you for coming.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. So we wanted to have this panel discussion, and as I'm looking at the group, this looks like an all-star team of a community, right? I don't know what role I will play in it, maybe the water boy, but I think we're in a good position to have a great conversation. And I don't want to spend too much of the conversation portion's time giving a lecture on the history of Bronzeville. I think that would be best suited to come from the actual panel. So what I want to start with, before I do a spiel, is I wanted to ask the panelists to each introduce themselves and maybe give us just a little bit of their connection to Bronzeville. And we can start.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Cindy Key, and I'm the Director of Operations at America's Black Holocaust Museum. So our connection to Bronzeville is that the museum has been there as a cornerstone in the community for years.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Big brother. Good morning, everyone. I'm Faith Polis. I'm the president of Live Communications, and I think that overall my connection to Bronzeville is that I worked in the Black press for 20 years, and I'm currently one of the projects that I have is a radio show on WNOV, which is also the oldest Black radio station in the state of Wisconsin. So I have a couple other Bronzeville stories I will share with you later on. I think that connection works.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matobe J. Johnson. I'm a visual artist, but I'm also here representing Bronzeville Center for the Arts, which is a nonprofit organization that just got started about 3.5 years ago. And I'll fill in some details with it later on, but my role is director, creative engagement, and partnerships. And so I look forward to having this discussion with my distinguished colleagues.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ray Hill. I have the privilege and the honor of serving as the Executive Director of the historic King Drive Business Improvement District in Milwaukee. And the Business Improvement District is the district outside of the Bronzeville district. So that is my direct connection with Bronzeville. But I have another connection which I'll share later on.
Thank you. Sam Blakely. I work for the City of Milwaukee in the Department of City Development, where I serve as the city's planning manager. I've worked at the department for about 15 years in a variety of roles in housing and neighborhood development, working on things citywide, but including in Bronzeville. And I think one of the things I'll talk about later is what we've done at the department to really use every tool in the toolbox to do what we can to support the various efforts that you hear others talking about, including some things that we have not done anywhere else in the city, because we recognize how unique and special Bronzeville is.
Well, my name is Patricia Diggs, and I'm the Executive Director of the Milwaukee Bronzeville Histories. How I was connected with this is that, if you see these pictures, my quest when I came back to help my dad out, which was about 10 years ago or so, and he was in a nursing home here, and, I saw a lot of the elders, and they used to crowd around me. And they started is going to preserve this heritage? And so I went on a quest with Miss Faith Colas, and you really have to have people who believe in you. And this has been such an organic thing. I don't know what is happening or why I keep pursuing this, but I think it's very important, you know, not only for people in the Brownsville area, but for all of us, you know, to get this power of place of who we are and where we came from. And Milwaukee has had such a rich history, and it has produced some high intelligent people here, and people who came here from nothing and made something. And that's something that we want to continue with this spirit, you know, in Milwaukee. And we are just so happy that we're here at the Milwaukee Historical Society. And again, people who believe in you. Ben, here you are. 2-3 years. Jolie, there you are. And, you know, you need Sydney Key. Yeah, you believed. And so anyways, I just want to say thank you for everybody who come. You know, this is hopefully a start of, you know, some really community interaction, learning, researching, and finding out who we are and how we can better connect with our neighbors. Thank you.
So we have Bronzeville, and before I go into asking questions of the panel, I want to just say a couple of things. One, Bronzeville is the name. For different people, that could be a different thing. At times, the community that we're talking about, which is the early black community and now black community now, went by different names. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because this is not a discussion that's more exclusive to who used the term. We're talking about the early black community, and so for people, depending on how old they are, and I am old now, depending on how old people are, that may mean something. You know, middle-aged people say they're old so they can hear people tell them that they're not. Make them feel good. So thank you all. But this name, Bronzeville, at times the community went by different names. It's a lot of names. I won't list them all. Inner core, inner city, black community. Bronzeville in many rights is a generic term to stand for black community, which essentially was important for individuals of the Great Migration who needed to know where the community was, where they could travel to for safety reasons or for reasons of growth. So we use the word Bronzeville now to recognize this era or eras and this geographical place. Right? And so I want to start moving over into the panel to ask them, because they're going to give much better answers. Just what is Bronzeville to you? Matope, could you start us off with just, I think you knew I was going to jump on that.
So my connection to Bronzeville and its name, if you want to kind of expand on that a little bit. So I came to know Bronzeville through an art dealer who I became friends with in Chicago, and her name is Susan Woodson. She actually came from Seattle, Washington, and in fact, Paul Robeson drove her from Seattle, Washington as a favor to her brother, whose name is Horace Caton. Horace Caton is a famous sociologist in Chicago who wrote about Bronzeville extensively, and in fact, Horace Caton suggests that the black community, or the black belt community, which many of those communities, as Katanga referred to, was called, really wanted to get away from being referred to as the black belt community. So Horace says that the folks in Chicago, which if many of you don't know this, share the sister name of Bronzeville with Milwaukee's Bronzeville. And according to Horace, he says that as as they were growing up, people did not like the term black belt. So keep in mind the time, we're talking 30s, 40s, 50s, and so black power and black existence and that self-pride hadn't come into its own until much later. And so therefore they adopted the word bronze because it was more representative of who the people were and what they looked like. And that was more enduring. So that's how the name Bronzeville stuck. And they became Bronzeville as opposed to being known as the Black Belt community. Milwaukee also adopted that name in later years after some consideration of understanding the same connotation. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, absolutely. And we have these terms earlier, with borders of Highland, Walnut Street, 3rd Street, and then 12th Street. And then we see this expansion. And the reason that we see this expansion is we also see a drastic expansion of the population, black population in Milwaukee. So in 1930, we have around 7,500 people in the population. And by the 1940s, we see that jump past 8,000. But in 1950, we see an explosion, right? And after that, the population just continues to increase. So I wanted to talk about, because that population increase is directly related to the Great Migration. And if anyone looks deep into the Great Migration, what you'll find is word of mouth, of course, is the primary resource of the Great Migration. But there's some secondary resources or some other resources that may be as equally powerful, and in some cases even more powerful than word of mouth. And we're talking about different forms of media. We mentioned Chicago, one of the most prominent forms of media that kind of promotes or really dictates the Great Migration is the Chicago Defender. But in Milwaukee, we have a relationship with media too. I know the particular panelist is probably aware that I'm leaning towards her right now. And if I could get you to just talk some about the relationship to media and African Americans.
Sure. So, a little background on me. I worked in black media. That's how I got my start in media for 20 years with Milwaukee newspaper. And I started as a salesperson. I started selling classified ads, and I was pretty good at it. And then I worked my way up, learning things in the editorial room, and listen to all of the jokes about you, new kid, just stand over there. And so eventually I became associate publisher, editor, and then publisher. And I will say this about the black press. The black press, along with the black church, are like twins, joined at the hip. And no one would have known about a better life in the North had the black press not been publishing stories about life in the North with black people. The other thing is this: no one in the North, black or white, unless you were word of mouth, was also a good, reliable line of communication, would have known about the horrific way of life that black people and people in my family lived in the South without the black press. There were no circulation distribution drops as we know them today. You would get your paper printed, it would be on a train, and it would drop. I know exactly in Batesville, Mississippi, where my father's from, where that paper would drop from that train. The train doesn't stop there in Batesville anymore. It only can go straight to Tennessee, to Memphis now. But I know exactly where those papers would get dropped. And people in the black community would pick those papers up and circulate them at church. In the little town where my father is from, Batesville, Mississippi, my family name is Thomas and Irby's. We have a church there that our family built. It's a cemetery there where everyone related to us, who married into the family is there. And what's so interesting is the Thomases migrated from Batesville, Mississippi to Chicago, to South Bend, to Milwaukee for a better life, and lived in Bronzeville, lived in that space, north, south, east, and west, that was allowed for Black people to live. My family lived there. My father graduated from Boys Tech. When you talk to him, you can't say Milwaukee Tech to him. It's Boys Tech today. As a master carpenter who built furniture. He designed furniture. And coming out of high school, he always wanted to have his own business. So he was an entrepreneur along with working side by side with other folks. I used to call it the fill-up station, because when you pull it in, you say fill her up. So as a kid, I'd say, oh, we're going to the fill-up station. My dad worked there. And so alongside that and his entrepreneurship, he met Gerald Jones. Gerald was just working with his mother, who was also associated with the Chicago Defender. And they started the Milwaukee Courier newspaper, the Milwaukee Star newspaper, and of course now WNOV. It was that entrepreneurial spirit in that family and the connection that they made with entrepreneurs like my father and others that also added to the life and the economic development in Bronzeville. My father's work probably can be seen up and down 3rd Street. If you were to go in some of these buildings, and if I could take him on a tour, he could probably point some of that out. I know he did all of the work in Black families that were business people in their homes for remodeling. And years fast forward, years later, my father said to me, you should start a business in public relations. I think you'd be good at it. I didn't even know what that was. I had to go look it up in the library. We didn't have Google then. And that's how I actually had a chance meeting with Gerald Jones. One of my clients was a Black cosmetology and business. And I was working for her to get her information out and doing special events. And I ran into Gerald Jones, who said, hey, how are you making money at this? I said, oh, I'm selling ads. Well, he needed somebody on his sales team. So I got recruited into what turned out to be the best thing that ever happened in my life. Next to being a mom, since it's Mother's Day weekend. Happy Mother's Day to everyone. But the value of the Black press, it's the only place that my late husband, Eric Vaughn, and I could have ever gotten our start in media. It's the only place where our stories, our celebrations, our births, our weddings, news and information could be seen and written about. It's the only place, it's historical. It's like a library in and of itself. Yesterday, today, and moving into the future. It's a long-winded way of answering your question, but I'm a storyteller too, so it's kind of hard not to take you from the beginning, or at least my lens of what the beginning is until now. I will say this, I had my 16th birthday party at a Black business in Bronzeville that my father had just finished remodeling. I think it was called Upstairs, Downstairs. Yeah. Y'all remember that? Jackson's place, yeah. And it was probably before the term day party got to be coined, because I wasn't allowed, to be out after a certain time. So it was a day party. It was a 16-year-old day party at the Upstairs Downstairs on 3rd Street. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I'm hearing the variety that exists. Patricia, could you tell us who lived in Bronzeville? What types of people lived in Bronzeville? What types of for people in Bronzeville. We're not looking for names and advertising.
Okay, all right. Well, through the research that, we did, it was just merchants. We had flower shops, there were restaurants, there were gathering places, entrepreneurial businesses. People had an idea, had a vision, got together, and made it happen. And that was a very intriguing point of my research. When Faith and I did this research, was that really? Wow, and not knowing that we were a part of that. We took from that entrepreneurship to better ourselves, when we were, growing. And so that's what I found, doing the research that we had, and they were thriving. I mean, you're talking about dollars turning around in the community, dollars were turning around the community, and people were helping each other. It was a real community. And I think this happened not only in Milwaukee, it happened all over the country. I mean, you had Detroit, Chicago, Cincinnati, because when the Great Migration happened, when the African Americans came from the South, it was covenants, in the cities that you were supposed to be just in this square. That's it, And so what happens when you're concentrated in squares, you make it work. You make it work for your family, and you make it work in terms of commerce. Now, another thing we found out about Milwaukee, you have to have an ad. This is a big ad. And you can see it in the history of Milwaukee. What provided people a good living here were jobs. I mean, Milwaukee was a toolbox of the country. I mean, people were putting up little factories on corners. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna make this work. And people were making a living. And another big portion of it were the labor unions. The labor unions here in Milwaukee was huge. My father worked at Laddish for 35 years. Who works for 35 years anymore? But 35 years, getting up every day, second shift. And real quick, I gotta tell you the story. I went down there, it was a tavern down there in Cudahy, and I was trying to research. I was trying to say, okay, what did my dad do? Who was he? Trying to figure that out. And so I went to this tavern, and this guy, he was a bartender, and I started asking about second shift at Laddish, and he said to me, what's your father's name? I said, Watson Diggs. And he says, yeah, I remember Watson. He used to work right near me, And he said, I can bet you, I can tell you about your life. And I said, really? You know me? And he said, I bet you went to a good school. I said, yeah, I went to Milwaukee High School. And so I bet you went to college. I said, I went to University of Wisconsin. I bet you got out of here too, didn't you? I said, yeah, I wanted to explore. I moved to Washington, D.C. And he said, you probably got one of these monkey jobs, I said, yeah, I got a PR. And he said, well, my daughter did the same thing. And he told me, I'll never forget it, he said, Miss Diggs, the reason why my daughter had the reason why you had the same opportunities that my daughter did was because of the union. They had to pay your father the same wage that they had to pay me. And when that hit me, it's like, whoa, And that was a big portion of Milwaukee. So anyway, that was a little bit of my research.
Thank you. And that union and jobs is we're talking about a process that it took a lot of negotiation, and in some ways and efforts, it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to manage even involvement with labor unions. So this is a task that the people who lived in the community took on. Some of them did not take this on for their own benefit. They took it on for future generations' benefit. And so I wanted to add in here that was a very rigorous process. We had a lot of people make a lot of sacrifices for employment. And so it wasn't, at one point it wasn't an easy thing to do. And at one point it became a lucrative institution, getting jobs, sustainable jobs. There's a difference between jobs that, keep you still in the struggle and jobs that are a little better financially. And it took a lot of effort for African Americans to penetrate that system. Once they did, others benefited from that. But speaking of, we're talking about the community, we're talking about people in there. And I'm looking at the board here of our website, and I'm seeing like it's on a particular person. And so Ray did mention that she had a story to tell as well. So maybe we could jump in there now to fill in the gaps of like who lived in this community.
Well, thank you for that segue. My name is Ray Hill, and ironically enough, I married into the name Hill. My maiden name is actually Thomas, so we might be related. But my maternal side is from Oskaloosa, Iowa, which is not too far. And my grandfather, my mother's father, spent years in the Navy and saved money by writing letters and poetry to one day open his own restaurant. And so he was able to do so in Bronzeville on 619 West Walnut Street was the address of the first Larry's Lunchette, where he had a lot of things going on. I was told a little illegal cabbing, like the first mover and things like that. And so for me, I did have the privilege of spending time with him. He passed away, unfortunately, when I was 16 years old. But my earlier iterations of him is really growing up going to the Clinton Road Center for pancake breakfasts with him as he played Santa and other things in his latter life. But understanding his role in the Walnut Street Festival and just really assisting other entrepreneurs and businesses in the area. He was also one of the businesses that was affected by urban renewal. So once Walnut Street was widened, he moved over to 12th and North Avenue where the gas station exists across the street from Leon Williamson's funeral home. And so those are the stories that I hear more about Larry's. I think it was called Larry's Big Daddy's Chicken Shack, which is a very big name. But those are the stories that I mostly hear. But when I was a little girl, I heard a lot about 3rd Street. I heard a lot about Walnut Street, and just his influence in the area. So anyone that would see my mom, they would get her confused with her sisters, and they just knew her, they knew the family. I remember going to his home on 12th Street. I can't tell you the cross street because I was too young to remember. But that was our area of familiarity. That was the area that I grew up in, seeing people who loved and cared for me, and also my parents as well, just to see how they were raised in this, as you described, the square, right, where they worked, they played, they went to school, they knew each other, the parents knew each other, the aunts and uncles. So that was what I was taught of what happened around, but ironically enough, didn't know how important he was and the work that he did until I actually started in this role. I was able to see him in the Bronzeville book, and that there were still some photos that even my mom hadn't seen. Had an opportunity to talk to Playboy Vincent around just some of his early interviews and footage, and how he had a custard stand, just things that I didn't know that I got to learn about him after his passing. So Bronzeville is not just a place that I work and have a very intentional connection to right now, but it's also in my veins. It's a part of my existence and who I am, where I am today.
Matope, you did a case study on Bronzeville, and that compared to be utilized in a couple of different areas of productive nation. Could you talk to us a little bit about that, and in reference to how did Milwaukee get a later start than some of the other places with this Black community development?
Well, the interesting thing that I alluded to earlier, and what connects, I think, all of us is really the Great Migration. That's how many of us arrived, and we talk about the type of people that live there. And so I can directly associate it with my family as well. And so there's something about Mississippi where folks are trying to get out of there because it was not exactly conducive for living for African Americans. And as you know, Jim Crow was at its height when people decided to begin to seek employment elsewhere. And so as the story goes, it's almost like having a sentinel family member who goes out, discovers the opportunities in the North, seeking gainful employment, actually gets employed by the factory industry that was pretty prevalent here in Wisconsin, Milwaukee specifically. And what would happen is they would go back south on an occasion, and because of this newfound wealth, believe it or not, the other relatives would see that, and then they would move themselves to Milwaukee, and you would end up with these, what I consider universal families, families that are 2 and 3 generations all in one household. And so keep in mind many of the situations that prevented us from home ownership created, these environments where we were focused on doing for ourselves. Those factory situations created an opportunity for making at least a decent enough living, and then using that entrepreneurship spirit to venture out on your own. So literally, the citizens would go to work at these factories and places of employment, and then at night work their own entrepreneurship projects. That brought a lot of that connectedness to Bronzeville. So nationally, this was happening pretty much in all those areas that were considered Black Belt communities. Many of them had similar names. If it wasn't Bronzeville, it was Brownsville, if you think about where New York is. And so my comparative analysis, when I actually did my thesis, I used it as a case study to look at what happened in Chicago, what happened in Milwaukee, and what was happening during the Harlem Renaissance in New York, which is probably the most captivating of all the stories of people that would have moved from the South and moved up north as far as New York and other places. And of course, the Harlem Renaissance, most of us are familiar with that, it gave birth to a huge art movement and being able to express oneself as a creative person. And I say that more broadly because it took many of us to be very creative and even just venturing out and having the boldness to be an entrepreneur, whether you were a musician, whether you were a craftsman, whether you were a writer. And so some of the most noted African Americans in the world, came from both Chicago, New York, and so we see this also emerging in Milwaukee, little known to some of us. And so that relationship through how I was able to have some direct connections with both Chicago, New York, and here really gave me an opportunity to really help document it. And in doing so, I also began as a visual artist to depict some of these famous individuals and some not so famous in the work that I do, so that we had a visual narrative along with historical photos, known publishing through things like the newspaper, and as you know, in Chicago, Johnson Publishing Company, and many others I could name, the mosque in Chicago. And so many of the things that happened in Chicago, much of that did not happen here. And so that we got the late start because, as my family goes, there was only so much that one could do in Chicago. It was like being a small fish in a big pond, and people were on top of one another. So what my family found is that it was easier to navigate in Milwaukee Milwaukee as opposed to navigating in Chicago, and therefore it created this this wave of migration. So actually there were two migrations, maybe even three. Probably 1917 roughly was the very first, where the railroads became a huge part of what we know connected the railways. The next migration period came between the 30s and 40s, and then later on in the early 60s, and that was just before the freeway started north of Wisconsin and made its way here, and that eventually disrupted, the life as we knew of Bronzeville in the 60s. In fact, I grew up on 4th and Brown, and we were, part of that. Had to move. Eminent domain actually came in and forced many families and businesses out of their homes. So my connection to it is I was born and raised in Bronzeville. I grew up on 4th and Brown. I went to Garfield Avenue School, right where, down the street from the American Black Holocaust Museum. And those Garfield Avenue School now is a mixed-use apartment complex, and that is the footprint of the boxing gym, which is was famously known there, and then many others, Hanson Barber Shop. So there was all kinds of businesses that connected Milwaukee. Those were some of the things that gave us the late start. And of course, we don't have the same kind of, I think wealth was distributed very differently in Chicago, and you see that comparatively. And so there was a different kind of wealth there. The beer barons, the Allen Bradleys of the world, those were private companies, not so much the public ones, and that wealth was not widely distributed, so therefore you didn't have the communities to spring up like in Chicago. Like you go there are multiple neighborhoods that can survive all on their own, and some people don't even have to go downtown Chicago. But there was a moment here in Milwaukee where, because we were forced to live where we live, we didn't have to go downtown either. The doctor came to my house, and we would go to the dentist maybe, and all the lawyers, the doctors, the services that we needed, all were available in Bronzeville. I can't tell you how many times I did not go downtown. Everything I needed was like within walking distance. The same with where people worked. They worked generally close enough that if you couldn't own a car, you could walk or take public transportation. So that was some of the things that connected Milwaukee to the lateness, and we're still emerging. I see Milwaukee as a young city, one that is now beginning to understand the importance of what is impacting all of our lives.
Faith, I wanted you to touch on you have a strong connection with Black business in the city. Could you touch on that a little bit for us?
So, sure. One of the things that I learned, probably organically, as my father was an entrepreneur, and my mother was one of the first African American models here in Milwaukee at an agency called Rosemary Bischoff. Do you remember that? Yeah. And my grandmother, when she moved to Milwaukee from Florida, so my mother's family is from Florida, they migrated here. My father's, as you know, is from Mississippi, and then they migrated here. My grandmother is a widow of a Korean War veteran, and so she left her children in Florida to be raised by her mother until she came to Milwaukee and got settled. And then she became an activist. Some of you may know her as Lucille Berrien. She is the first African-American woman to run for mayor in the city of Milwaukee. I have pictures. She just turned 95 years old. So we had t-shirts printed with her campaign in downtown Milwaukee. But when you are in an atmosphere of 20 years in the Black press, a lifetime with an entrepreneur, my father is a master carpenter, a mother who was making waves in Milwaukee through print media and, car shows as a Black model, and a grandmother who was an activist. It's kind of hard not to be focused on where are we spending our money. And so On the radio and in print media, and in my family, there is a focus on spending our money with Black businesses. It's a focus. If people didn't spend their money with my father, I never would have been able to go to Milwaukee Lutheran or any parochial school. You know, I never would have been able to even think about going to college. We never would have been one of the first families to live in 53206 who actually was homeowners, you know. So I am on a personal mission, and I talk about this constantly on my radio show, how important it is for us to spend our money with Black businesses, all of us. It is not a conversation about anti-boycotting. It is a conversation about inclusiveness. When you think about where you spend your money, it's okay to think about a service that an African American company can provide. So in my household, and my late husband was the same way. He came from Washington, D.C. with a whole nother mindset of what Black business looks like. Everyone in his family was an entrepreneur. I mean, every single person, including him before he got into media, worked in those businesses. And so together, we always encouraged people to support Black business. And so I have to share this story of how important Black business is as a Black entrepreneur. As I stated, my father left high school and became a master carpenter. He was a furniture maker right out of high school. I mean, my first bedroom set, my father made. He made the same bedroom suite for my mother for the wedding gift. There was a job opening for a furniture designer and maker in Sheboygan. He applied, he sent in his renderings. They loved him. They asked to meet with him, to interview him. When he made the trek from Milwaukee to Sheboygan, he showed up. And of course, he's a Black man, and the job was no longer available. Weeks later, he saw his renderings in the daily newspaper from the same company. That's what made my father pivot and say, I'm going to be my own business person. I'm going to go into business for myself. Not to say he didn't have odd jobs along the way. He worked at Harris Lumber. Does anybody remember that? I don't even know if they're still in business. But he worked at Harris Lumber for years alongside of building his own business. And so knowing that story just made me always have in the back of my mind how important it is to spend my money with people that look like me. You know, on my way here, I stopped at Sam's place. Got my latte. You know, I make it a point at least once or twice a week to spend my money with somebody Black. This shirt I have on came from my daughter, who has friends in California that are business owners. And so she is the same way. We have to be conscientious of spending money. We want you all to read Essence and Enemy. Those Black publications, yes, they talk about Black life, but if you are living in an urban area, you need to know about those things that interest us and that are important to our lives. I mean, I have a subscription to Forbes and Time Magazine and Essence. So, in my household, I have diverse reading material, and I expect my allies to do the same. So after the death of George Floyd, I have a squad. I have several squads. One squad is made up of all white women. I'm the only Black person in the squad. And so they all got on a Zoom and they called me afterwards and said, Faith, why didn't you tell us? I was like, tell you what? How could you not have known? How could you not have put those things together that happen every other week somewhere in America about Black people? Well, what can we do? Y'all can start spending money consciously with Black businesses. You can walk in and you can tell your circle to do that. In our community, in the white community, and this is not the correct statistic, but this is just for a framework for this conversation. In the white community, the money stays around, let's say 6 months, circulates. In the Hispanic community, I think I read something where it circulates maybe 3 weeks. In the Asian community, about the same time. In the black community, hours. A few hours. A few hours. That wasn't the case in Bronzeville. 6 times. Over and over. And I have to believe now, this is the activist part that my grandma poured into me. I have to believe that urban renewal wasn't just for expansion, for highways. I have to believe that it was purposely disruptive to the economic engine of black people being empowered. That's why we need all of us to be conscientious of how and where we spend our money. We appreciate your business.
Thank you. Something powerful about urban renewal. We know about the highway and other urban renewal policies, and then we see a drastic change in business and community ownership, for lack of better words. So I want to bring up that then we saw a blueprint because we saw a difference prior to that, and now we're moving into a different direction. And I want to talk about, before we move into today, because this panel is about yesterday and today, right? And tomorrow, when we think about planning. But I want to ask Pat, before we move on, what is the importance? Because we heard a lot of stories. We heard information and we heard personal stories. And in our work, we found people throughout the community that have these personal stories, but don't quantify them as something that should be documented. So we have rich histories in attics and basements, unfortunately in garbage cans and landfills. And we want to prevent the garbage can and landfill phase, so we want to intercept in the attic phase. But what's the importance of documenting this history?
It's history. I lived in Washington D.C., for 25 years. And the biggest thrill for me was the Library of Congress. And it's history. It should be documented because it's who we are as a community. And I think, especially with the Smithsonian National African American Museum in Washington, D.C., sort of proves, it's been a situation throughout American history that history was separate, especially black history was separate from American history. Well, that didn't make any sense. But what is becoming now is that, no, American history is black history, and black history is American history, because we would not be here as a country if it wasn't for the history of African Americans in this country. And I think that's where we are, in terms of this new shift, in our country. I know it's a lot of politics that goes on with this, but we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about parents' life. We're talking about our father's life. We're talking about faith. It's like, where did we come from and where are we a part of? So I think in terms of actually documenting, getting these stories, even being a part of the Milwaukee County Historical Society, is that, no, this is Milwaukee. This is Detroit. This is Chicago. It's not a separate history because they intertwine with each other. And I think that's one of the importance. And learning about each other, and if you want to comparative analysis. You know, you think about the early immigrants, you know, one portion of history I really like, going to New York, the Lower East Side, how the immigrants, Statue of Liberty, how the immigrants came, the European immigrants came to, you know, to the shores of the United States. And you start looking at this, and you're saying, that's similar. You know, going from, you know, the oppression of Russia, trying to find something new, starting out with nothing, making something out of something. And this is the American dream. I mean, this is who we are as Americans. And so, yeah, so the history should be documented. And then you start asking, why not?
Thank you. Sydney, why, I want to have you jump in on that. Your relationship to America's Black Holocaust Museum. Why is it important? Why is it important to even have America's Black Holocaust Museum?
Thank you for the question. So first, just for anyone not aware here, America's Black Holocaust Museum is a museum here in Milwaukee, founded by Dr. James Cameron, and it's a memorial museum and historic museum, but with a very unique lens and history based on our founder's personal lived experience. The founder, Dr. James Cameron, is one of the few known survivors of a lynching in American history and one of the only people to write about that experience firsthand. So he established this museum and very intentionally kept it here in Milwaukee for what we're talking about right now. That preservation of history, that sharing of stories, that creating a place where the history is not only preserved, shared, but honored and recognized and shared widely. And so when we talk about what is the significance of documenting, the significance of just collecting this history, it's happening all the time. We have in our families historians who are maybe unknowing that that's what they're doing, but they are. The folks who painstakingly scribble names and dates on the backs of photographs and describe what that event was, what this family function was. Those are historians, community-based historians, the folks who keep all of the baby shower programs and church, literature that comes home from church. Those are community historians, and so when that ends up in a box in someone's attic or basement, and then no one knows what to do with it when we deal with end-of-life issues, and folks are just like, well, this doesn't look important. Where do we go with that? Where do we go with that ephemera, that cultural material that documents people's daily lives, which is really significant? And specifically in the context of African American communities, where there's been intentional disregard for daily life and lived experience of African Americans, knowing how those events are organized, where they took place, who was in attendance, who spoke, who gave the benediction, all of these things really matters. And so it's so important to have places and people, repositories for that information. And so not only sharing Dr. Cameron's story, I think that wasn't his only goal. I think he really was intentional in creating a space for us to have archival storage. I see my colleagues here in the audience, and I'm so thankful for their work. And this is really a history lesson for all of us, so thank you for the stories that you've shared. This is, we kind of are the history nerd kids. I see Casey over there, she's our intern. Mia here, she's our history department. This is, the stuff that keeps us up at night. We love to find these stories and these narratives, and how do we share that and preserve it as well. That might be a little bit long with it. Okay.
I'm coming back again. Okay, I'm gonna give you a break. Ray, what's happening now? Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the, because we know that if we say before was a blueprint, right? And we talked about arts and culture, but we primarily talked about entrepreneurship and employment, right? And employment, of course, requires factors outside of the scope of a person. You have to have a person hiring to be employed. But this entrepreneurship piece, right? And I think that we kind of focused on that a lot. And I know you have a direct connection to that spirit. But can you talk to us about what's happening now with this entrepreneurial energy?
Sure, I can speak on that. I also just want to share just around the histories as we were talking about what would be deemed as the past. I would have to say right now is actually historical time as well, and I'm reminded of that. I just even being on this panel with many of these distinguished guests as well. But I think even when I think about the work that the Business Improvement District is doing that expands far out of Bronzeville as well, there's been a direct connection with everyone on this panel, whether it's with Bronzeville Histories and making sure that we preserve that information during Bronzeville Week and sharing that with the trifolds that you all have on your seats, to Sam with the city and a lot of the planning that we've done intentionally around transit, around development and zoning incentives, to Matope and his work as a creative, and with the Bronzeville Center of the Arts with their new facility, in addition to a larger development that will be coming in a couple of years, to Faith and her work, at the Urban League, which is also in the district, as well as being featured on WNOE with just sharing the information that is actually happening and taking place in the bid, as well as Sydney and the work that America's Black Holocaust has done, and them being a destination where there have been thousands and thousands of people who have came into the corridor, and our goal is to ensure that they're also, once they leave the museum, there's a place for them to eat and to shop, and so to really circulate that dollar. And so that's just with this panel of folks that we're sitting with, or I'm sitting with right now. But in addition to that, our main focus is to really increase property ownership, so commercial real estate ownership with those who own businesses as well, to really increase the value, and one, it helps the city as well, just to get properties back on the tax base. But for us, it's really around how do we shift people's mindset from self-employed to actually entrepreneurship, where they're providing jobs not only for themselves but for others. And so we're seeing that in some of the newer businesses that have opened recently, with Honeybee Sage, who has over 6 employees at her establishment, and that's her second location, to Sam's Place, which is a little northern in the corridor. But of course, that's a staff of 4 or 5 that usually is in that establishment. Marantha Plant Shop, the Black Holocaust Museum. There's just a lot that have really taken that hey, I'm opening something that is I'm good at, and that it was a niche for me. Pepper Pot is a great example of that. He started outside of his house and went to a location of 42nd and Capitol, which was a grab and go, and now has an actual sit-down restaurant as well, and employs several people. But those are the stories, that's the continuation of the lifeline that we want to support and uplift and encourage others to take part of. But that is around the specific work that we're doing, is really increasing not only the business and creating more vibrancy to the corridor, but actually increasing commercial real estate ownership.
And can we have Sam speak to that from the planning manager perspective?
Yeah, thank you. You've heard just tremendous perspectives on the history of Bronzeville, and something that Tope said that stuck with me, that I think has influenced a lot of the work we've done with the bid on how do you recreate some of the historical Bronzeville in Milwaukee right now. Is I heard him say things about I could walk, or people could walk to so many businesses. People could take transit. You could get a lot of your daily services in the neighborhood. And those are the stories we hear repeatedly. And then there's been a team of people in the city for the last 15 or 20 years, and I'm a small part of that. It was under the leadership of former commissioners, Michael Morgan and Rocky Marcoux at the city, my colleagues, Shay, Aging, and Ron Emanuel, who've just really said we need to be doing everything we can as a city to be investing, especially given that it was policymakers and government officials who took some of the steps you heard that dismantled the former Bronzeville, and to right some of those wrongs and to do what we can to invest in recreating some of those things. And you've heard what Ray and the BID are doing to kind of foster that entrepreneurial culture. I think we at the city have supported that through our work on our commercial corridors team. But when we look at planning for the future, one of the things I want to just focus on is what has been unique about our approach to Bronzeville is to acknowledge that there's just so much in the city that we don't know. And that we need to make sure that as decisions are being made, they're being made by people who have both historical and current ties to Bronzeville. And I think that's really driven a lot of our work in setting the foundation that you asked to hear about that we're kind of drive to work forward. And I think that started back in 2005 with the first kind of modern Bronzeville redevelopment plan. It said, what steps can the city take to bring back that very tight-knit, walkable neighborhood where you're able to, achieve a lot of not just entrepreneurial goals we heard about, but physical development that allows for both ownership and wealth building. And we did a lot of things at the time. The city acquired a lot of land along North Avenue and said, we're going to be thoughtful about how we dispose of this, and that we're going to plan for it. And one of the things I think is the most unique in Bronzeville was the creation under the leadership of Alderwoman Milwaukee Cogs of the Bronzeville Advisory Committee. And that is, I think, one of the kind of the elements of the secret sauce that has led to what you're going to be seeing in success in the next few years, which is, again, putting the power to make decisions about the future for land use and investment much, much closer to people who are most directly affected. And so the Alderwoman Cogs established Common Council Action, an actual body that before the Common Council or the City Planning Commission or the Board of Zoning Appeals votes on any land use issue in Bronzeville, or before our department makes any awards of financial grants or real estate transactions, it actually comes to an advisory body. And Ray serves on that body, my colleague Terrence Moore, our commercial corridors team, as well as under the leadership of LaShawn Vernon. That's the group that is truly taking a position on saying, is this right to advance that vision? And that's a step that we don't really take anywhere else in the city. It's unique to Bronzeville, and it's really allowed for thoughtful and intentional planning. It's also taken the steps, formal steps that we've worked in partnership with the BID on a number of planning processes. Fast forward to the end, the most recent one, after years of saying, how do we, through our economic development and planning and development and zoning tools, set the framework that allows for that type of business and mixed-use activity to occur. We actually worked through multiple planning processes to come up with a new land use plan for Bronzeville, and Ray and our team were a big part of that. I'm happy to talk more about it if people have questions later. But then the step that we took last year, that again was unique in Bronzeville, probably doesn't have a comparator anywhere else in the city, is we actually worked with a group that included representatives of the Bronzeville Advisory Committee, the BID, local business owners, to say, how do you actually change the rules for development in the Bronzeville area to make sure that as new development occurs, it advances some of these goals of recreating the Arts and Culture District. And the Common Council last year approved a zoning overlay that basically says if you're going to be developing here, you have to be doing it in a way that advances those goals. And that limits what can happen on the first floor of businesses or of buildings in Bronzeville. It has to be a use that directly aligns with the goals that we heard from the community for the Arts and Culture District. It also allows for additional height and density and development on the upper floors with that goal of saying, how do you kind of recreate that really, active and organic energy that allowed for more residents, more transit, more walkable neighborhoods that support business and entrepreneurship. And so that was something that was passed last year. We've been planning for years. Some of that planning influenced what's happened at key sites, whether it was there was a neighborhood community, Charette, back in 2013, that kind of helped think through how do we reuse the former Garfield School and provide a home for the Black Holocaust Museum. After a lot of discussions that kind of hit brick walls on how do you achieve all these goals together, the community came together in a planning Charette to do that. So the power of planning in Bronzeville is very real, and I think with the team that has been working on it, again, it's not about what we in the city want to see or we don't want to see. I think we viewed our role as almost the scribes of what is the community's vision, how do we hear that, listen to it, and use the tools we have to make sure that the tools in our toolbox are aligning to achieving those goals. And I think that you're starting to see that, and it's just been really amazing. I have great optimism because I know the wisdom and intentionality that went into
Tope, can you take us through a brief walk through the history of art in the community and bring us up to work of arts and culture in the community now?
And so I don't want to be selfish in some of my approach to this because there are other artists that are living and working in Milwaukee that have connections that really connect this globally. Actually, so there are a lot of artists that have been born and raised here. Some remain, others have moved on, and so many of the talent that I think that we've lost is sort of a reflection of some of the things that we actually need here. And for those of us who have chose to stay and continue to work as arts professionals, look at Bronzeville as a case for cultural conservation and preservation. So some of that was said, among many of the panelists here, and we know that our thoughts are very intentional. So it could actually be said that when you think about Bronzeville as a tourist destination, what are you coming for? And so that arts and cultural district, the way I see it is it's hard to imagine Bronzeville without Bronze people in it. And so for the most part, the strength of what we knew about Bronzeville and how it became so famous was because of the entertainment district that many of the people that traveled to and from places around the country came here because of Milwaukee's jazz scene. Many of the artists in their travels, stayed in the neighborhoods when they couldn't even stay downtown. There's a place that was known as the Black Hotel that's actually on Palmer, where dignitaries like Ellington and Cap Calloway and Louis Armstrong actually stayed overnight because they couldn't stay downtown. And so there are places like that. So I would say that for me as an artist, I stand on the shoulders of many of the people that came before me. That includes the residents who have stories that they can tell themselves. I come to this as an artist, and I would say that the visual arts probably largely was born out of the Black Arts movement, which probably I'd say emerged between the late 60s onward. And so what we see is this kind of a second renaissance for us, but a renaissance in a very different way, where we get a chance to do some reimagining and restoration of a place that we've come to know as, a place to live and work, as a profession. So we're trying to grow that side of the arts, and so many of my artist colleagues have been working, in concert with the city, with the BID, with colleges and universities to actually help reimagine, restore, and continue to think of this conservation as part of our mission. As I was growing up, I didn't see, many artists like myself. I couldn't, go and talk to an artist who I knew made a living doing what he or she was doing. So many of the people that I was looking for became my contemporaries. I didn't realize I was looking for myself. And so essentially, what we see is this a renaissance in our mind that gives us a chance to create in a very different way. Many times artists are marginalized because you think that what we do is for fun and it's not a real job. And I'm here to tell you that that is so untrue. That what I do is a real job, and I'm serious. And what I've done the majority of my life is to think of creative ways to actually not just make a living for myself, but share my experiences and pass on some of the knowledge that I've acquired and partner with others who have like interests in trying to grow these interests so that we can close that wealth gap. And I can't tell you how important it is to be able to restore the dignity and restore the ability to have one make a living. And so when others begin to benefit from having to make a living, then they will also diversify their earnings and giving other people a chance to do the same. And so until we get to that moment, the struggle is real. But we have an opportunity, and that opportunity is happening as we speak. And many of us that sit on this panel have always made it a point to usher in kind of a new way of thinking. And as long as we continue to do that, we're able to reach back and at least grab another, and be able to pass some of the things that we've learned and acquired and take that into the future. And that's the goal. One of my pet peeves is actually to help build a creative workforce that is willing to stay here, and therefore I may not have to lose, creative colleagues to other cities that embrace them more.
Can I add?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Because I have a creative in my family. My daughter is a dance performer and an actress. I spend a lot of money educating and putting her through city camps for dance and all that kind of thing, because at the age of 3, she said, "Mom, I want to be rich and famous. I want to dance." And that was only because she was exposed to City Ballet, Lee Palmer, an artist, a creative here in Milwaukee, that did tours throughout the public school system. And so she got that entertainment, creative bug early on. She'll be 39 on Monday. She's been self-employed as a creative since she graduated from college in Philadelphia at the University of the Arts. And if anyone knows about arts colleges, they're expensive, And every time I wrote a check, she'd call me, she'd say, "Mom, thank you so much for investing in my dream. I promise you I'm gonna make some money." But she didn't come back home. She left Milwaukee, went to Chicago for college, from Chicago to Philadelphia, from Philadelphia to Vegas, traveled globally dancing, and now she lives in California and she's an actress. We've got to support the creative. We've got to know that it makes us feel good to go to a play, to go to a movie, to walk through a museum, to see, art exhibits. But somebody put a lot of time into that work. That is a real career and a real job, y'all. And so when you think about decorating your office or a home space, or you know someone that loves art, think about adding to their art collection with a Black piece of art, or a membership to one of our cultural diverse museums. Or when you know someone in your family that's starting a business, maybe they want to start their business in Bronzeville. These are the ways that we have to just kind of think, When you all leave here, tell 6 people that you know that you were here and that we have Bronzeville happening here in Milwaukee.
Yes. So just the discussion of the arts, I'm so thankful that there is this thriving and long-standing arts community here, but I'm a newcomer to this city. I'm a transplant. I've been steeped in Bronzeville, and I love it, and I have learned that so much of the art community here is lost to other cities that have other opportunities or embrace them in different ways. But I have a high schooler who is a student at High School of the Arts, and she's an actress and a dancer and all of these things, and she has those opportunities, the opportunity to just even dream of that as a possibility for her future life, right? Because there are folks here that are doing those things now. And she actually was inspired because she started her theatrical training at First Stage through opportunities provided for students that usually don't get those opportunities. And similarly, even there was a production that they did on Bronzeville a few years back, I don't know exactly when, but that was something that inspired her to really think, oh, this is something I can do. Oh, I can do this now, right? You know, she was what, elementary age then, but I can do this now, and seeing her peers and, her contemporaries and seeing that they have that training and investment and sharing Bronzeville stories is significant even at their young age, was just so impactful for her. So to know that the arts is thriving here, but what's really special to me, and just that I've been reflecting since we're up here with this panel, is how much history that each person here has shared, personal narratives, some of it just overarching American history, but really what I'm taking from this is how much history is informing our present, but to imagine our future. What are we going to create next? What are we going to bring forward in this new reimagining of Bronzeville, with all of the lessons and the artifacts and the stories and the lived experience that we have here for Bronzeville? Like I said, I'm not from this community. My husband's family, he's born and raised here. He has the same migration story. His family came up from Mississippi and they went back home every summer, right? They have that same experience. His grandmother worked the overnight shift at a bakery so that they could go to Milwaukee Bronzeville. Him and all of his cousins, right? So this is their same type of story. My family comes from Florida, and we have a migration story. I was born in Pennsylvania. That's one of those things that follow. So this history is so deep and rich, and translatable across timelines. For us here who are young and young at heart, this is all of our story to learn and know and share into the future. And then, I'm sorry I'm taking the liberty of some time here, but just want to share one of these things and how we can understand how this translates in a personal narrative and how this history impacts us today. We talked about so much of this migration story and how it created this opportunity for this booming, middle class, and what urban renewal practices did to that when nothing was returned there to replace and restore those communities. And so that late start that we're experiencing now is because it was intentional disruption, that's factual, and there was nothing put in place to restore those communities. So now we have these collectives and advisory committees and artists, independents, scholars, all of these people coming together to create these opportunities. But I'll just share one personal thing on how this impacts. Like I said, I'm not from here, but we talked about this, and I share this when I'm talking to folks at the museum. Road trips is a thing, right? And my nephews, they would get so irritated every time. Oh, we're just going. I took care of my nephews a lot. This concept of found family in the Black community, we help out wherever we need to. And so that's common for lots of communities. But when we would take road trips, we're like, oh, we're going just 2-hour drive in Florida. And I'm like, pack lunch, we need lunch. Let's get these sandwiches. Let's pull this cooler out. Let's get this. And they're like, we're going to pass 20 McDonald's. It doesn't matter. You don't need to pack any food. And I had to really, they were just so annoyed with me. And I still do it now. I have 3 daughters. I still do it to this day. And it's because of those practices that helped keep people safe on that migration, right? You could not stop for food. You couldn't know where to stop without Black print media, right? The green books of that era, the ad that had been placed in a paper that said you could come here and be served with dignity and have a meal. And so I had to really evaluate why I did that in my age, in my era, when I'm safe to go wherever I want, I can eat whatever I like. These are practices and cultural practices that we've inherited generation after generation by experience. I've never had that personally in my life, but I inherited that from my mom and her sisters. And so anytime we were getting on the road, fill up gas, bring a gas tank, and there's some lunch in the back, there's a cooler full of, and everybody's nodding and understanding. You had your soft drinks, pop, right, all of those things, because we had to find a way to make, as people have already said here, something out of nothing. That experience to travel with dignity and safety with your family at a time when those opportunities didn't exist still informs how we act today. And so when I think about what that means for Bronzeville's future, what can we bring there? What opportunities can we bring? What type of entrepreneurial spirit can we tap into that says you can come here and visit, and these are the abundant opportunities that you have to have lunch with your family and enjoy culture and see people, diverse people but also acknowledge these arts and experience. I know I talked too long.
And I was gonna you segue, because that's the question I was gonna ask you. And I wanna make sure I give some time for the Q&A. I know you all can ask much better questions than I can, but I just have two more things. Sydney, if you could talk to a little bit about the relationship between the community and the museum. And then following right after that, could you talk about the actual developments that your organization is doing, even right now?
So the relationship of America's Black Holocaust Museum and the community is a deep relationship and a strong one that has really been a part of the cornerstone of the many things that contributed to the reemergence and the designation of the current Bronzeville, which I believe was in 2005, right? Or in that era. So the museum's relationship, there are, we've spoken about the investment of the bid and the Alderwoman's investment in helping to bring back the museum, as well as the developer who helped reimagine that Garfield campus, which includes America's Black Holocaust Museum as an anchor tenant in that building, very intentionally in respect and honor of our founders' goal to keep that museum in that community. And so when you think about the concept, which to my knowledge, I don't think it exists anywhere else, the fact that there are 70 residential apartments above the museum and next door, that above a museum focusing on Black history as a critical component of American history, I don't think that exists in any other city, right? And so that the children that live in those apartments and next door and that will be soon going to school across the street can see themselves and their history shared and respected and acknowledged. To me, that's revolutionary. And so the connection to the community that the museum has is a long-standing connection, really built on this concept that our founder had of wanting to create space for healing and reconciliation, but also imagining the possibilities of the future. And so what I was told, I never had the opportunity to meet him in person, unfortunately, but what I was told is that he would welcome every visitor to the space that he could in person, and he was especially excited by young people visiting, because that was one of those opportunities to revolutionize the world, having these kids in here to learn about their history and their place and their role and what that means next. So as far as Bronzeville and the museum's relationship, the museum is going to be there for a very long time, and I hope that all of you all will continue to support and learn about how we connect to the community.
I'm going to connect a couple dots for you. I had a chance to get to know Dr. James Cameron and also his son Virgil. I don't know if Virgil is stopped in the American Black Holocaust. Yeah, he has. So Virgil is actually a good friend. He and his wife Carol. So we go back many, many years. And so the important thing is that what we're talking about here is this connectivity. I think everyone that's on this panel, I think I've had some sort of exposure to in some capacity. And so it's really about partnerships. And so what we've done over time, and when I say we, that includes all of us, is really to work together to try to push Milwaukee forward in a positive light. We've heard many, many complaints about what Milwaukee isn't, and it is the worst place in the country to live. And so, if you like, so I want to say that what many of my family members and I have always done was, if something didn't exist here, we could research it, we could travel to other cities and maybe bring a piece of that back and maybe recreate it for ourselves, so that we had that sense of wellness and a sense of place. And so out of what was born out of this idea to use art as a tool to recreate these positive spaces, or spaces that we could spend time in, hubs, if you will, not only gave birth to educational venues like the American Black Holocaust Museum. So at Bronzeville Center for the Arts, we which I would say that I'm an agent of. Our goal is really to partner with our community partners, with people from various sides of Milwaukee and even the state. I can't tell you how much I've traveled in the last just few months to make this reality. The one thing about, and I'm going to mention the bad word, COVID, Bronzeville Center for the Arts was actually born during COVID. It was the best time for thought and to have this introspection and think about an incubation period that could give birth to a great idea. And so what our intention and vision is to build and support a creative arts community. And so one of our projects, as Katanga alluded to, was we're in the process of building a small footprint gallery on 5th and North Avenue. That's, if you drive by 5th and North, it's underway. It's got roof on it, it's got windows, it's got doors. It's a real place that ultimately will house our planning office, a makerspace gallery, and an art gallery next to it. Our initial office, planning office, was upstairs from the American Black Holocaust Museum. And so we kind of transitioned from there into other spaces and to continue the planning. So we hope to have our first project finished end of September, October roughly, and we'll activate programs that will tie directly into activities like Bronzeville. We support the Martin Luther King Day, which we have partnered with over the last, probably 10, 15 years. And so when we start physically doing programming in concert with what, we see Ray doing at the bid is really just to continue the momentum that the Alderwoman also, has given us permission to do. And then fast forward, hopefully by 2026, we'll see a first of its kind, 50,000 square foot African American Art Museum located on the corner of North Avenue and King Drive. So we acquired the former DNR building, so that's on 3.5 acres of land, and that 3.5 acres of land just represent opportunity. And so just bear with us. Let us start off with our small footprint, create some partnerships, grow into the kind of city that we know that we can become.
I want to send us out of this portion of our conversation with Pat. Pat, if you could close us out with the significance and steps moving forward.
Yes, it's about steps moving forward. And I'd like to announce that Katanga and I have decided to create Milwaukee Bronzeville History into a nonprofit. That's something that we're going to be stepping forward. And also, my vision has always been to actually develop the history portion of it into a research digital original digital lab. And what that is basically using the new technology that's out here, and again, this is happening around the country, and start digitizing not only pictures, but the oral histories. I mean, we're looking forward, of putting out a big proclamation in Milwaukee for our elders or young people to come forward and to actually record the histories, of their families and put it into the archives of Milwaukee. And so that's something that we're looking forward to doing in terms of doing, utilizing all the new technology. We are in partnership with University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Marquette University, and also the Wisconsin Historical Society, which they are basically getting ready to build this big museum up in Madison that's going to really draw people all over the world. And so that's something that we're looking forward to do, to really move forward the history. And I think we're going to open up for questions and answers, be a little bit interactive.
Yeah,
Is that what we're
do
doing?
that.
Okay. And that's what we're doing. First of all, if we don't get to this point, I just really am very thankful for everybody to show up, you know, on a Saturday morning. I think we are all a part of history, and this is really great that we're beginning to make these connections with each other and building community, you know, as one Milwaukee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I want to open up these last 10, 12 minutes for any questions from the audience.
My eyes keep wandering to photos. Are they in a book somewhere? Or is I just thought about it. Where are the photos from? Are they in a book somewhere?
Yes, these are photos that, again, Faith and I put together in a book called Bronzeville and Milwaukee Lifestyle. And I'm trying to, we have it over here somewhere. I wanted to show you this.
So we have a book. And you can also purchase this book at Bronzeville, right, our neighborhood museum.
Yeah, this is the book that that we published years ago, Bronzeville and Milwaukee Lifestyle, and we started to put together, you know, some of these pictures. We found a lot of these pictures in the old Courier archives, and we put these pictures together because, again, you know, they were just scattered around. And Irene Goggins, her collection is actually at the Milwaukee Public Library right now. And we went up to her attic one day, and she had this whole box of some of these pictures. It was in a box, and she was about to throw them away. And so we were working with an anthropologist, Ivory Black, and when she said, "Oh, well, these are just pictures. I mean, who cares about the poem?" And we said, "Stop, Ms. Goggins. No. You can't throw these pictures away." So anyways, but she didn't, and now the Milwaukee Public Library has a lot. Thank you.
Well, I was wondering if there was a time frame when yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine and she said North Avenue was the cutoff line. I don't know if that's correct, but the way I understood it, of Bronzeville. And so I was wondering, was there a time frame when all of a sudden that barrier was taken down and then people moved out of Bronzeville?
So I can't speak to the previous timeline. I will say, moving forward, I know Alderman Cox has implemented legislation to actually put the boundaries from actually Burleigh south to Walnut, just to really pay homage to the original map, which I think is a lot larger, that goes all the way up to west of 27th Street to Capitol Drive and probably east. Holton but I will say that it was historically larger than what has been noted today. Typically when people reference Bronzeville, they reference Walnut Street to about North Avenue. But in fact, I think historically it's been a lot larger.
It was a lot larger.
It was a lot larger because I remember my grandmother living like in 16th and 17th and Center Street.
Because my neighborhood was all black.
Yeah.
And it was on 7th and Center.
Yeah, exactly.
So I never knew about Bronzeville.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know there was a rugby.
Well, I would say organically wherever we lived was Bronzeville because we weren't allowed to purchase homes or live in other neighborhoods, you know. And if you did find a black family or two in another neighborhood, it was going to, they were probably one of the first in that neighborhood, but they would definitely not be the last, you know. So there is a term, white flight, that's very real, and that's what created a lot of the integration, I think.
And just to piggyback on that, prior to 1960, There was a 120 block radius recognized as the inner core. And again, that's kind of why I started the conversation off by giving a little bit of explanation to the word Bronzeville, because that wasn't used primarily by a lot of people. So some people may actually recognize the community and not recognize the name. At 1960, the mayor's office released information that they designed, or they created a new barrier of a 400 block radius that included Center Street, even up to Burlock. And speaking to what Faith mentioned, was after that decree, it really sparked white flight. That was already in existence, but that decree really, it was like within the next few years a drastic transition.
And that makes sense because I was 4 when we moved from Locust Street, maybe. Get out of here.
I say how old you were. I just said it when you were.
But I was 4 when we moved to 25th and Center, and the home that we purchased, the previous owner was an alderman, Martin Schreiber Sr., and he took a liking to my father, my mother, my father's work, and really wanted to shepherd them, and so he sold the family home to our family, and that's where I grew up until I was 16, and then we moved to the Sherman Park neighborhood. There's a number for you, brother.
I can tell you one of the reasons why they might have looked at Burlock, because actually Orchard Field was there. Yeah, and in fact, I don't know if many of you might remember, if you've ever kept up with the Negro Leagues, the Milwaukee Bears actually played at Orchard Field. And so I won't give you a year, but I was saying that when I was a kid, I actually played at Orchard Field when I was a kid. So, in fact, we lived, at that time, once we left Bronzeville, we moved to 7th and Locust. So that's why I was asking, because we lived on 7th and Locust, my family did. And this was before the freeway came through, so we played from Orchard Field. There was pretty much a parkway that we used to go and play there. And then the freeway came right past our house. So we were part of that, of the destruction of Bronzeville. We lived and saw it, with our own eyes. So just to kind of give you an idea. So that might be one reason why all the women is looking at as far as Burlock. And maybe even up to 5 points. So maybe Sam, we can talk about that a little bit more. But the boundaries have been recreated. So to answer your question, it might have also gone to east of the river and over to part of downtown. Because I remember even as a kid going as far as not just Valley Street, but St. Paul, because that's when the trains came in to drop off produce in the 3rd Ward, which was where all of the railroads had their storage facilities, and my family actually shopped there on Saturday mornings, and we would go to places like Railroad Salvage. I don't know, maybe some of you, some of you senior folks might remember that. And so look at me talking about senior people. So I'm talking to people who happen to be my own age. But anyway, the thought is that, so the idea is that, yes, so the boundaries were wider in the sense that, where we had to travel to get services. And so since then, of course, there have been 5 neighborhoods that have emerged that really make up, I think, our current Bronzeville. And so because of the business practices to extend some of that to boundaries, probably as far as 5 points north, and then I think we're now looking at maybe the Lead or Juneau South, perhaps, maybe like the Deer District, perhaps. So some of that's overlap.
Transplant, I'm still suffering. So, being a transplant here about the history of Milwaukee is almost like mixed emotions, because I don't know, early on about the rich history such as Bronzeville, black decades and sometimes centuries, for example, the highway, how that we set up. So how do we bring that back to understand or relate to people the importance of how we plan out the city, the importance of Black economics, and then as the storyteller, how do we tell that story to the people so that we are more engaged in some of the city processes and more engaged in the planning. We had the Bronzeville overlay where we had community feedback, but how do we get people more engaged to understand, hey, this is not just for now, but this is really going to affect for hundreds of years or generations. How do we, bring that back? Because again, all the history, but now there's a gap, and now we're trying to bring another generation to really understand, and so to really establish that. So planning and storytelling,
So everyone, and then I'll chime in after that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a great question. And I'll go back a little bit to something I said earlier. I think it is very powerful when, for people to hear stories like this and to hear and see pictures of the Bronzeville that now we talk about regrading. When you then kind of go one level deeper and you heard that from the panels, what made that resonate with you? What made it great? And the things that you hear are often music to our ears in city planning. And I sensed that earlier. The things you hear are, there was this vibrant mix of uses. You could, you'd live upstairs and, your mother could send you to the butcher 2 blocks down, and then you'd walk back and you'd see someone you knew from around the corner, and that was your family doctor. And that, in city, that's the stuff we live and breathe in city planning. And I think asking, how do you, fill that gap, I think the more we talk about that and use those kinds of terms and not technical terms, and we're bad at that, and you know that we're sometimes bad at that, and it's like talking about those in real terms and saying, if you want to create a physical environment, a social environment, economic environment that has that, we need to be thoughtful about that and be intentional about that, and that's how you design your streets. You talk about Walnut, people often talk about Walnut Street being the heart of Bronzeville, and they use terms like ripped up or destroyed, like very visceral terms, and well now, Walnut Street's going to be reconstructed over the next few years, and now there's intentional decisions about saying, if widening it was a ripping up of the fabric, what does narrowing it mean, and what does redesigning that street mean for people mean, and sewing that back together. And that's about physical streets, but there's also about the economics, and it's how do we use the tools we have if historically the government used our financial resources in a way that was, whether it was discriminatory or put up barriers to investment in Black businesses, how do we now do the opposite? How are we intentional in our programs that we're operating, whether it's the city, whether it's the bid, to reverse those trends and acknowledge that there was that disparate impact or intentional discrimination in the past, and how do we completely do the opposite this time? And the same with the built environment. And it's like, so I think you said it exactly right, and there's no one, and that's the beauty of, I think, the group that's been put together to move Bronzeville forward, is there's no one person or group or actor acting in silo that can do it. You need artists. You need artists to get people excited about the arts and culture. You need musicians to, play a street festival once a year on Bronzeville Fest that gets people coming. But then you also need, the planners, the economic developers, the real estate developers to help build it. And I think that's what's very cool about the group has been so passionate about this for the last 15 years, and again, it gives me great confidence.
For me, it's about empowerment. We have to empower them, and we have to share. And so telling the stories, doing printed documents, being able to share it with the public. Many times when we started distributing, the history of Bronzeville to many of the citizens, and a lot of them are transplants coming from other places. And so here's something to think about for the next 50 to 100 years. One of the things that's going to change the dynamics of not just Milwaukee, it's going to change the dynamics of Wisconsin, is that fresh water. That water is going to draw people from all over the country because it's a rare commodity. It's becoming a rare commodity. So we know for sure that part of our reimagining what Milwaukee is like and where we live and how do we grow it, how do we become part of its economic wellness, is to empower people. And so as I alluded to earlier, when you begin to kind of share that wealth, people they're willing to reinvest that wealth, and you'll end up with the rich neighborhoods, you'll end up with entrepreneurship where they're willing to, have the means to be able to support one another. Without that support, we have stagnant growth. So, you know, the key thing for us is that we have to share with one another. We have to partner more. We have to see our strength. Understand, yes, that there may be some weakness in, you know, ignoring that fact. But once we begin to recognize what our real strengths are, you'll see a very different world. You really will. You'll see a very different Wisconsin.
And then just want to add this also, I know, in our economics, I'm also responsible for also changing our narrative. We always talk about the black, the incarceration in the worst place, but on the flip side, we have, you know, National Geographic, one of the best places to visit, and we have black leadership that's increasing, that how we should potentially start changing the narrative to make it much more positive for black folk. Yes, we're not ignoring that negative part, but hopefully changing the narrative, like being more potential proactive in those positions to really stand up and say, hey, we're intentionally doing it, and it's just not ourselves.
I really thank you for this question, because another part of why Bronzeville is so significant is the institutions that are coming there. BCA, the America's Black Holocaust Museum that exists currently, is creating opportunities to bring younger generations in to learn about this history and to see themselves and to contribute to it, right? Because it's not enough to just create the space and say, here, show up. They have to want to be energized to come there. There has to be creative and innovative programming to bring them to compete with other, other things that they might be interested in doing, to create opportunities. For example, the museum hosts interns to create pathways to museum professions and other skills that are not common. We're hosting this summer the Earn and Learn program,